Welcome to the City of Edina's Human Rights and Relations Commission How to Stop the Hate event. We are so glad you are here this afternoon. Extra points. I do know it's gorgeous outside. I do know we don't have that many more days, so huge thank you for taking the time to join us. I'm Amy Siegel. I am a commissioner on the city's Human Rights and Relations Commission, also known as the HRRC, and one of the planners for today's event. Thanks also to our live stream audience. Thank you for joining us as well. Planning the event took a decent amount of work, and I had the pleasure of working with our chair, Joni Bennett, and my fellow commissioners, Leticia Guadarrama and Fartun Ishmael. So thanks very much to you. And before we dive into what I believe will be an engaging, impactful program, I would just like to ask any elected officials here, and I know we have some behind us, would you just stand for a moment and let us just recognize you and thank you for the time you have taken to be with us today. Yeah. Thanks very much. And some of my fellow HRRC commissioners are here today as well. Would you also stand and be recognized? And thanks very much to you and for all the work we do together all year long. As many of you know, we held a similar event last year. We called that event Stop the Hate. And during that event, we listened and we learned from members of our community who unfortunately experienced acts of hate here in Edina. At the end of the program, what we heard pretty universally from participants is don't let this be one and done. You know, it was a nice show, but come back next year and follow up and talk about, so what are you going to do about it? You know, is there anything we can do about it? So that's what we are about this afternoon. Unfortunately, as many of you also know, pushback, right, at times of change is common. And in fact, sometimes the more you want to change, you know, the harder that pushback is. And in our community, we have experienced more than a few acts of hate, you know, over the last year. So very unfortunate, and it means, you know, we're just going to work that much harder. Students of history understand, and a word we learned last year, upstander, you know, someone who will stand up, speak up when they see something, and people driving change know this is a long haul work, right? We all understand. We're not going to stop hate with one event, with 1 year, or I hate to say it, even many years, because we are fighting against, right, centuries of learned hatred, centuries of people wanting to create an other for multitudes of reasons. So we have to work even harder. Deep appreciation for those of you who are here and those watching live, you know, have committed to the work and to keep going. The idea of working both individually and collectively, you know, is what we need to do. Our program today is going to offer tools and strategies at multitudes of levels. At the local level, from community groups who've come together to combat hate, to the governmental level, at city, county, and the state level, and probably the most impactful, and the thing I'm probably looking most forward to hearing about is, you know, the personal level. What can you do person to person? So I am hopeful and excited that all of that work will help us learn better, you know, how to stop the hate. And before I kick it off and give it over to our facilitator, just want to share a few what I hope are inspiring images where people, many of you who are here today, and others did come together to stand up, to say no, and to work against some of the wrongs, you know, that have been done in our community. And it is now my real pleasure to turn the program over to a dynamic and I think energetic and insightful facilitator who will take us through the balance of the program, Dante Curtis of Catch Your Dream Consulting. So thanks very much.
unity, community. It's what brought y'all here today. It's what we do when we stand up and say no. It's that thing that you can't explain it, but you know what it feels like. For me, community matters. And as I think about the power that's in this room, oftentimes we want to look for the mass demonstrations. We want to look for the people who are out stopping traffic. But it is this group of folks, yes, you all, that can bring change to this community. When I think about the power of community, I oftentimes go to one of my favorite quotes by Margaret Mead, who says that never doubt that a small group of committed citizens on a Sunday afternoon when it's 70 degrees in Minnesota can change the world. Indeed, it is the only thing that ever has. Friends, as I ground this today on this stolen land that has been taken care of by our Dakota and Ojibwe neighbors for centuries before we uprooted them, as we come together to stand up against hate, to not focus on problems, but focus on possibilities. As today we are not focused on certainty, but rather curiosity. We are not here today to ask what is wrong, but rather what is possible. It's in that spirit that we have this conversation on how to stop the hate. Are y'all ready to make this thing happen? Are you ready for some action? Yes. Let's kick it off. We're going to start off with Dr. Terry as she comes and shares with us an example of what community can look like and feel like. Dr. Terry?
Got it. Thank you, Dante. 2.5 years ago, my husband passed away from cancer. The same week, all of us experienced life change. The shutdown, the pandemic, a new way of being or not being together. 2 years and 4 months ago, George Floyd was murdered. A couple months ago, a noose hung from our school district's building. How are you doing? Do you want to talk about it? For those of you who have yet to meet, my name's Terry Rose. And that's how this work in Edina started for me. Walking down my streets, knowing I didn't have the heart space to protest or clean up streets and places I knew well. I started asking my neighbors, how are you doing? And do you want to talk about it? 30 people showed up on my driveway, COVID style, and we began talking and really began listening. From my black and brown neighbors, I heard, I feel more comfortable when I walk in the neighborhood when my wife's with me. I carry my driver's license when I jog. When I walk through the parking lot, I hear the door locks click. When I shop for my family, I'm confused with the Instacart shopper and treated as though I'm an employee. I had to have the talk with my 16-year-old, about the police stopping because we have pretext stops, maybe the lights off on the license plate. And they can stop you because you might look like somebody who has an open warrant. I never had those conversations with my kids. I've never had those experiences. And those are my experiences of my black and brown neighbors. And more importantly, what I heard, we don't think it's going to change. We don't think George Floyd is going to make a difference. I've worked in social change a long time. And there's this adage, start where you live. And that was my call to action. I have to do this work because it's the responsibility of those with white skin, those of us who could leave this work at any moment to step forward, to have the conversation with each other. And so that's what we started. The Anti-Racism Collective is what it's become, but it's really just about neighbor to neighbor. How do we learn together? How do we unlearn together? How do we begin to speak out and transform what happens right here in Edina? It's going to take all of us. Racism, changing, transforming is a collective action problem. It is the work I do so my grandchildren will not have to do it. And so I wanted to invite you into the conversation with your neighbors. Our secret sauce, small groups, 3 or 4 people. Let's talk about a book chapter. Let's watch a video or listen to a podcast. We have a new group called Learning to Lead that starts Tuesday. It's on Zoom. It's really just neighbor-to-neighbor conversation. Gives you the opportunity to start your journey, continue your journey. Find out who in your community wants to see transformation happening. It's going to take all of us. Please stand with me as I go to prove my neighbors wrong. Change can happen right here in Edina. Together we can do it. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Terry, for making a call to action, to talk, and to listen. We are going to start a conversation with the people who sometimes, when things happen, we look to them. We're going to start with our government officials today, as we have the privilege of being with 5 people who have been either elected to office or who serve in governmental roles. I want to introduce them, and then we are going to start with you all asking what you want before we do this traditional panel thing where we just talk to them. We're going to start with community first. So let me tell you who's here. So we first have Edina's Mayor, James Hovland, the Police Chief, Todd, 2 representatives from Hennepin County, Health and Human Service Safe Communities, Ifra and Lisa Bailey. And last but not least, State Senator Melissa Lopez Franzen. Will you please welcome them? So I want to start with you all. As typically we come to these spaces and they are the experts and we sit and we listen, but we know that the answers really lie in community. And so I want to invite you all to think about, what do you want to know in response to this question? How do we stop the hate? There are 2 volunteers who are here with microphones. One is in the back, and then we have Leticia up here. I would just invite you to raise your hand if you have a question that you want to kick us off with today.
Good afternoon, everybody. So I was thinking actually of Senator Franzen, but this is for all of you. My experience is that when you face racism in a structural form, it kind of has some similar stories. And I wondered if you could tell stories of when in your institutional role you've come across racism, and just share some of those stories, because I think they're things that we don't expect always. And I'd love to hear some of your stories.
Awesome. Thank you. Anyone else? We have one up here, maybe? Oh.
I'm going to let you hold the microphone. Okay. Yeah. Hi, I'm Jasmine Stringer Moore, and I serve on the Human Rights and Relations Commission. And I think Terry's question about how are you doing? It's really powerful. You know, I find that my state and being of how I'm doing is very fluid these days. So I'd love to hear from the panelists on how they're doing and what are they doing about how they're doing.
Thank you.
Well, friends, let's start there, as there is typically a inclination to rush to action. Let's start with you all first. The question is simply, how are you doing? We'll start with the senator.
Good afternoon. Can you hear me? Great. Thank you all for being here, and thank you for the invitation. I was here last year when we had this conversation, and we wanted more. We wanted to hear more. We wanted to talk more, and that is just the great power of convening. So thank you for all the organizers for doing this. And it's important, because if we don't talk about how we're doing, we're not going to be able to solve those issues and solve those problems. And we are here as people who are elected or in positions of power, but at the same time, we see hate and we see these issues in very different perspectives. And I'll start with the first question, Carolyn, because I'm going to turn it into a positive thing, because when I first moved here from Puerto Rico, when I spoke Spanish, I remember people looking at me like I was from a different planet. So language and the acceptance of language and language barriers that our communities face might not seem like hate and discrimination, but it can be. And I'll give you a story of one year, I think it was my first term in the Minnesota Senate, where I had a constituent come in and she spoke English. She brought her mother, and her mother would not say a word, and they were having issues with their housing. And she looked really down, and I've mentioned this story before. I realized that she spoke Spanish, and when I spoke Spanish back to her, she just lifted. She just became seen. She was seen. And I say that because, just the acceptance of people from different backgrounds and respecting people's cultures and people's language, and not seeing it as a foreign thing, but embracing it. We have so many languages spoken in all of our Edina public schools, all of our communities throughout the state. And maybe I haven't myself felt discriminated directly, but I have been looked at with different eyes when I'm speaking Spanish, and especially with my family. But I embrace it, and I think we should just really embrace that with people and respect. And back to the question of how we are, we've gone through a lot. In the legislature, we've gone through a lot. We've been more polarized nationally and even locally than I've ever seen before. And one person isn't going to fix it. But it's events like this, conversations that we continue to convene, that will. And we're in an election year, and things can be very, very controversial about who's voting for what. But talking about things, talking about issues in a way that's not personal, that's really about education, just to name one thing, about making sure people have the appropriate resources to get through, making sure we have supports for public safety and mental health, and who are those people who are going to help with those issues and are going to come to be elected to solve them. I've been very privileged to be in this community. I will continue to work on these issues with or without an election certificate, because it's really important. This is our neighborhoods and our families, and with my two little kids, I was really impacted by the issue mentioned about that noose in Edina public school system. My youngest just started kindergarten in that building, and my oldest is in a French immersion program in elementary school in Normandale. So I took that personal. So not just because it's my community, but my kids literally are there. And how am I going to talk to them about this incident when they're 5 and 7? So I took to Twitter in a way that was talking about the issue, not being silent about it, because when we see injustice, when we see wrong things happen in our community, it is our duty, whether you are an elected official or not, to call it out. So I find opportunities to do that. I do that respectfully, and I hope we can continue to have those respectful dialogue with our communities and with our communities of color here and abroad and beyond.
Great. Thank you so much. Chief?
Thank you, and I also appreciate the invite. Very happy and grateful that I was asked to be on this panel. So for me, an example that I can think back on, and for those of you that don't know, I've only been here for about 13 months. I came from a city from Brooklyn Park, and I worked there for about 29 years, so I have a lot more experiences in law enforcement out there, so I'll refer back to my time at that place, at that location. But I can think back to an assault case, and there was an African-American man that was assaulted by 3 white males, and he was assaulted really just because of the color of his skin. And it became a very public event. It hit the media, and the investigators at that time did a great job and solved the case and brought charges forward. But a lot of people in the community were left with, how could this possibly happen in this day and age? And so on the back end of that investigation, that launched a really good community conversation and a healing opportunity for community members to get together and talk about what happened and learn from the experience and how to move things forward. And so that was just a great outcome that happened from that, so that people could learn and draw attention to the issues at hand, which were very, very impactful to the community, to the community members and the police department involved at that time as well. The next question is, how are we doing? And so in law enforcement, that's a very big question, and there's a lot of things going on in law enforcement, as everyone is fully aware of. There's been a lot of issues that have been going on. We talk about building trust with community members. The George Floyd murder is one great example in terms of how things can go very poorly and how law enforcement needs to learn from that. And so there's been a lot of work moving forward on how to build trust and those relationships in the communities. But also officers are stressed, and they do great work. But because there are so many things going on, we talk about crime upticks in the metro area, for example. That's putting a lot of pressure on law enforcement. Recruitment's been an issue. We're no different from that conversation here in Edina. And so how do you move things forward? Well, you don't give up. Officers don't give up. They continue to work hard and work for things forward. But you also have to take care of yourself. And so when you ask the question, what are you doing to take care of yourself, somebody, or what I met earlier today, said, hey, it looks like you lost a little bit of weight. And that might be stress, or it might be because I'm taking care of myself. I don't know. But it's important to work out and take care of yourself. And so eating right, workout on duty are things that we do here, and then taking care of your mind and being mindful of the work that you're doing, learning about mental health. We here in Edina Force, I want to say Force, but we make sure that our officers go in for an annual checkup with a mental health professional just to get education, understanding about the things that you're seeing, the things that you're dealing with when you're working in law enforcement and dealing with very traumatic incidents here. So those are the things that we're doing in law enforcement to continue to take care of ourselves and making sure that we're doing a really good job in this community. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you. Mayor?
Thank you, Dante. You know, when you mentioned earlier that community was extremely important to you, I think for everybody in this room and beyond, everybody wants to feel like they belong to something that's bigger than themselves, that they matter personally, that they're part of something bigger than themselves, that they're part of a community. And what does that mean? It means it's a place where people are working together, looking out for each other, caring about each other, trying to make sure that adults and children in the community reach their potential. And so in terms of modeling conduct, government has an extraordinarily important role with respect to behavior and how we treat each other. We call this a How to Stop the Hate event, but you know that has such a broad connotation and implication, and I think we realize that. For decades, Edina, and I think we were one of the first suburban cities to have a Human Rights and Relations Commission, worked on these issues over time, but they've become more and more important as we've moved along through life. And we had an incident in October of 2016 that kind of propelled us to the next level of looking at how the city as a governmental entity interacts from an institutional standpoint, from a financial standpoint, from a services standpoint with the people that come to us and want to interact with us and make sure that they're being treated fairly and respectfully. That's extended out to our own hiring practices as a follow-on to that incident that occurred in October of 2016 with a young African-American man. We set up a race and equity task force that was co-chaired by one of our present city council members who's in the audience, James Pierce, and another member of our community named Jesse Kingston. Out of that came about, I think, 40 plus recommendations, that many of which have been adopted by the city, including hiring a race and equity coordinator, Heidi Lee, and who is working internally on all different types of matters related to race and conduct and modeling behavior. So by modeling inaction or inaction, government has an extraordinarily important role to play in how we how we get the temperature turned down and start getting people to respect each other. You know, we saw the inverse of that with South Africa during the era of apartheid. And we see it modeled some places, even in our own country, by some leaders. But I think at the local level, what I'm seeing at least across Minnesota, particularly in the aftermath of the murder of George Floyd, the death of George Floyd, we're seeing people really that are involved in government, whether it's a local or county or state level, working very diligently to make sure that we lead by example.
Thank you. Lisa?
There we go. Thank you. Thank you, Dante, and thank you to the Human Rights Commission for inviting us, my colleague Efra Jama and I, here today. I'm in my role now as Director of Safe Communities, which is a very new department that we can tell you a little bit more about, area at Hennepin County. Efra and I just started this summer. We're learning over the course of the last couple of months. We're hearing many, many, many examples of the kind of racism, hate, bias, issues that have been referred to already today. And what we're learning is that while things may fade from the front page of the paper, they're still out there. They're still impacting communities. They're impacting individual small communities, and they're impacting us on a much broader level as well. And so what we're doing right now, and Ifra can speak a little more about this, is investigating, basically figuring out who's doing what work on this, talking with local providers across Hennepin County, with the coalitions that have formed, and trying to figure out what role can the county play in working to combat this. So we're hearing a lot right now. And you would think that would be sort of horrifying, and in a way it can be depressing when we get to the question of how we're feeling. But I think both of us feel energized because what we're seeing is that while some things have faded from the front pages and they're not maybe hitting the headlines every single day, there are people out in the community working on these issues, and they want to work on them, and they want to come together and come with solutions. And so it's just something we can't think of it as just we can't just address these problems when there's an emergency. It needs to be something that's happening over and over and over again. So I think we're both energized, still in the investigations phase of figuring out what to do, but what Hennepin County rather can do. But I think overall we're feeling energized. And I won't speak for her.
Thank you, Dante, and thank you everyone for having me today. How am I feeling? 2 months ago when I started this work, I was really energized. I'm excited. I am so excited that we have so many people who are invested in, combating anti-hate, bias-motivated incidents. And we really I still want to continue the work of creating that belonging, that sense of community. So yeah, I'm excited. There's days where I go home and I think about the conversations that I had with the community, and those feelings come up. But the next day I put on my hat and I want to make sure that, we are addressing and resolving. And so there's a lot of work to be done, but I'm really excited about the attention and that people are really having the conversations about it. So I feel good. I feel good. I'm hopeful.
So some of you all started to mention things that y'all are doing, right? Hiring a racial equity coordinator for the city was one of those things from you, Mayor. I'm curious if the police chief, if you can speak to what is the police department doing to prevent some of the things from happening. We know that normally, something happens and we want to call 911. What are we doing to prevent these bias incidents and hate crimes from even taking place in the first place?
Sure. So when officers aren't responding to 911 calls, I talk a lot about preventative measures. And so that's a big scope and focus of our work. So it's that downtime, it's engaging the community, it's building trust. And so we think about bias-related crimes, one of the biggest barriers in place is it's underreported. And so I think I know a lot of people are fearful of making police reports, calling 911, but the focus for us is how do we engage the community and how do we build a relationship so we can make that pathway easier and bring people forward to talk about things that they're seeing out in the community so that we can handle it, have the conversation, but also take enforcement actions if necessary as well. And then part two to that, one of the initiatives that we're working on is building what we call a cadet program. And so for us, the mayor spoke about how we're hiring different recruitment strategies, and so what we're going to do is hire what we call cadet officers, and they're our first layer, I would say non-sworn staff that would be hired on to eventually become police officers, and we're looking for candidates with diverse backgrounds that typically reside in the metro area. And so those will be our future. Those future officers will be our future police officers. We're going to offer tuition reimbursement, and there's some barriers in place for kids coming forward that want to be in law enforcement. So for us in Edina, that's one of the initiatives that we're working on heading into next year so we can help and continue to build the relationships in our community.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So, Senator Franson, we know that, as you talked about, we're in this divisive political landscape right now. What's possible as we think about, as it's election year and next year, what's possible in the legislation session?
Thank you for that question. And we have to find a way to come together to pass and take action on legislation. As Chief Milburn was mentioning, some of the training, we've had bills to enhance and support law enforcement to see if there's any way to support and increase more sensitivity around hate crimes. So some of my members have worked on, colleagues in the Senate have worked on legislation to do just that, and it hasn't passed because it's been party lines in terms of how it's operating in the Minnesota legislature, which is unfortunate because when you talk about hate crimes, we're not talking about Republicans or Democrats, we're talking about human beings. So we should be able to do something, come together to ensure that everybody has the resources they need, whether it's law enforcement or that we increase awareness of those hate crimes. We did, I will give a lot of kudos to my colleagues. We did pass one resolution back in 2021 and in April, where we condemned acts of violence and racism, hate against Minnesotans of Asian descent. This was in the midst of the pandemic, and this was spearheaded by Senator Fung He of Hmong descent, because we did see an increase of hate crimes for Asian Americans across the country and here in Minnesota. So that was a resolution. It doesn't have enforcement authority, so we have to do more than just say we stand for something. We have to act. So there is ways as well to work with the Minnesota Human Rights Department, where you can actually call their hotline and be able to report a hate crime. And we put some funding for that to increase visibility for that hotline. We did see it being utilized and the supports being there, as well as you can go through litigation in some cases, and they will provide the resources, or at least the information you need to pursue that if you do have a case that merits litigation and enforcement in that matter. But we do have those ability to do that. I do think we have to take a deeper dive in our work in the legislature, and next year, it's a budget year. There's going to be a lot of funding because we did not finish our job this last session, so there's a lot of funding available, and it's going to be a budget year. So I think communities can come with innovation and their ask, but I know we had a lot of money for law enforcement to support and for communities to support, because not every community is the same, right? So we want to make sure that people have the resources they need, whether it's money, people, or education, for that matter, on how to tackle these issues at the local level. It's not just one size fits all. So I'm very confident that we will come together because you all expect us to. We can't afford to keep passing the buck or ignoring the issue, because we have seen an uptick in incidents across our country. And it starts with the legislature, so we can start being civil, doing the work that you all elected us to do, and get together. So there's been some progress, but certainly not enough. And after George Floyd, I'll end with this, we did pass one of the largest judiciary law enforcement bill that we had to date, but there's still a lot room for improvement here.
Okay. Thank you so much. So I want to ask, and we're gonna start with you, Lisa, around how does community access Hennepin County, right? So something happens, like we know y'all doing, we know that y'all are doing great work. How do the community get a hold of y'all and actually, in response to some of these things that are happening? What, if something happens and we try to get a hold of Hennepin, what do we do? How do we do that?
One of the things that we're finding as we are doing this work of talking with community groups and with municipalities and police departments is we're finding out that there isn't a very clear path towards reporting, towards finding out information in general, just what is a hate crime versus a hate incident or a bias incident, and then who's keeping track of all that information. And what we're finding is that it's happening in a bunch of different places around the county, and some of the organizations, CARE, CAL, I just know all the acronyms, they're working with some law enforcement, and it's here and it's there and it's patchwork. And one of the biggest complaints we've had is we need to be better. There needs to be a much clearer path to reporting, to learning about what is out there, and then to recovery afterward and services for victims of these incidents. And so right now, I'll be honest, there isn't a great way to contact. Well, Hennepin in general is many, many things, but that's one of the things that IFRA and I are working on is how can we help support the providers that are out there now and say, should there be one place where things are reported, or where you'll have more information about how and where and when to report, and also how to get services. So we've heard that loud and clear. I'm sure folks here, I see people nodding, that is definitely an issue. So it's something we're working on now.
Mayor?
We have a great partnership with the county, and this is one more way I think we can work together. Because we do have information on our city website on what we think is a bias or hate crime. And Heidi Lee, would you raise your hand, please? Heidi is responsible for much of this activity on the city website, our Human Rights and Relations Director. And so, and we encourage folks in our community to just, don't guess about whether you should call 911. Our operators will help make those decisions. But if you want to report something, don't hesitate to do that. And to the extent that information on our city website on bias and hate crimes might be helpful to the county in better defining how you want to approach the issue, it'd be great to have one more way to work together. So, just like I'm doing, tomorrow I'll be down at the county with the Violent Crimes Task Force on the Minnesota MN Heals 2.0.
Oh, great. I'll be there too.
All right. See you tomorrow.
Senator?
Can I also add that a segue to everything that Lisa just mentioned? There is a bill that's been introduced, and you all can look at it right now, and maybe it goes along the lines of what we just discussed. It's Senate File 2003 or House File 1691, and this would expand and improve reporting of hate crimes. And the bill did come out of the House Judiciary, Finance, and Civil Law Division, but it didn't make it through the Senate. It would expand the categories of crimes motivated by bias to include bias against a person due to the person's gender, gender identity, or gender expression, and bias against a person who associates with someone in a protected group. It also directs the Commission of Human Rights to collect supplemental data on crimes motivated by bias and appropriate money for grants to assist in collecting the data to provide support services for victims of those crimes. So maybe there's some synergy here that we can work not in silos but with each other in collaboration, and maybe with your help we can pass it through the finish line and get bipartisan support.
If I could just follow up on that, Dante.
Of course, go ahead.
I think that's exactly the point of this, our whole safe communities and IFRA's role. So we are very excited about that, and that's one of the reasons I feel so energized by this. That I think governments around the state and organizations are realizing that and coming to realize that we need to actually put resources behind these efforts. So we're looking forward to that.
Chief, yeah, you got the same question. How do we, what do we do after a hate crime happens? We know that your office is probably the first office to get called. What do we do? How do we access the Edina Police Department?
Yeah, that's so to follow up on these conversations here, and the mayor pointed it out correctly. The first step that we want people to take if they should see any type of a crime that has a bias connectivity to it is call 911, because the most important thing for police is to get out and document what happened, and that's key for investigators to do the proper follow-up with that. We do see it time to time where people are concerned about calling 911 or wait too long, and then evidence can be, discarded or just not available to us when we show up on scene to handle that. Senator talked about certain expansions of laws, and that's important too, because we have to apply the law to state statute and or ordinance. And so when we get involved, there's some things we can do and there's sometimes things we can't do. But bias-related crimes are an add-on to existing crimes, and those include assault, damage to property, and harassment. Those get pretty wide in scope. But what Senator is also referring to is kind of expanding that as well. And so that kind of gets us into a framework of things that we work on. And if we do have evidence and we can prove a case beyond reasonable doubt, we will add on the bias-related offenses to that for the prosecution, and those would be enhancements as it would work itself through the judicial system as well. So to clear that up on the crime investigation front, that's how we handle those.
Awesome, thank you. So before I ask my last question of you all, I want to open it up to the audience. We have a question here.
I was just going to, before we go to more questions, to what the chief talked about, in terms of limitations, sometimes we face limitations, and Terry Rose gave a good example in her presentation about a recent incident that we had over at the school district where there was a hangman's noose placed on a school district piece of property. Kids trespassed. If those kids hadn't been trespassers, it might have affected how we could have dealt with the matter from a law enforcement standpoint. The chief could speak to that a little bit more articulately than I can, but there are sometimes limitations based on the existing law and what we can do, even though we recognize that there is racism involved, there's hate involved, there's some sort of bias involved, whether it's a neighbor-to-neighbor conflict or something like this incident at the school.
Yeah, and to follow up on that, so typically you have to have a victim of a crime to pursue that matter, and then it differs from public property to private property, so there's things within an investigation that are important for prosecution down the road. And on that note, I'd also point out that even if it isn't a crime, it's still important to contact police on the front end, let us do our investigation, because on the back end of that, we can connect in with HRCC groups here and committees, and also with the department or county level officials to do the back end work to see how we can handle things beyond the criminal investigation scope as well. So I just want to press upon that to make sure you call 911. If in doubt, we'll take care of the front end work and get it where it needs to go.
Thank you. We have a question.
Thank you. So one of the things that I still struggle with. So my wife and I have been in Edina, I think, for 8 years, and we've enjoyed being in Edina. It's a great community. Many of our friends are in this room today. But one of the things that I struggle with when we have these conversations, it's the same group of people. And I think we have to lean into the fact that today, just as you started, Dante, it's a beautiful day someplace else in our nation, and there's another group of people that's having the same conversation about community and action, but their sense of community and their outcomes are different from ours. And as long as we still have that dichotomy of in our nation, then the question is really, how are we going to formulate outcomes and actions to address that element? Because as long as it's still the same group of people having the same conversation, and Senator Franzen mentioned it earlier, we can have legislation till the cows come home. But if the legislation that we have, we can't prosecute, if there are, and Chief talked about this particular issue, we've had others where there are actually laws on the books that allow hate, and there are actually laws on the books that don't allow us to even give grace in situations when there are minorities that have committed offenses. And so it's so complicated. But my question is, given that we know, and I'm just going to repeat it, there's another group, multiple groups across our nation that are having the same conversation. They're trying to build community. They're trying to create action. They're trying to have different outcomes. And those outcomes are the opposite of what we are seeking, and personally what I believe our nation needs, right? But how do we deal with that as a nation and as a people?
Thank you. So what I would say is that before we leave today, part of my job is to support us in creating some action and making some commitments. And so I'm going to hybrid your question and let them answer it, but know that everyone in this room is going to have a chance in about 35 minutes to answer your question personally. Because I also agree, right, that action is important, and talking is a part of the conversation. I mean, talking is action, but we have to make sure that we move it, what I'd like to think of from philosophical to practical. So we are going to make sure that we leave here with some practical action, brother. I guarantee you that. Yeah, on the last question for you all, on the issue of action, I want to invite each of you to just take, give us 30 seconds. I just need one thing that you can commit to doing to help stop the hate in Edina. We're just going to popcorn it, because I know some of y'all might be introverts and need time to think about that. So for my extroverts, you can go first. Just one thing, just one. Because focus is important. We don't need you to do 10 things. We need you to commit to one thing right now. What are you going to do this week to at least start to stop the hate in Edina? Anyone can start.
I feel like everyone's looking at me. I'll make it easy. Teachable moments. I have a kindergartner and a second grader, and we say hate is a strong word. We say that all the time. And what does that mean? So just unpacking things and making every moment a teachable moment with my kids, because those are going to be the next mayor, the next police chief, the next teacher. We have to start teaching our kids. They're watching, they're hearing everything we're saying, and they're hearing everything around them. My 5-year-old the other day was in my minivan as I pick him up from school, and he said, "Mom, did they name Russia because they rushed into war?" And I was just flabbergasted. We're not talking about this happening, and he's just absorbing and observing and listening. And we unpacked it, and it was a very interesting way how they connect the dots, and that's how we all connect, and that's how biases start, right? So just nipping it in the bud early. I'll do that with my 2 little boys, but when you hear again something that does not sound right, it doesn't have to be a combative conversation, but unpacking it with your neighbor and having a civil discussion. We need to go back to that, to be neighborly and to be able to talk to each other, not just on Twitter. I mentioned Twitter earlier, but I never have a flat-out argument on Twitter. I like to be very respectful, just the way I want my kids to be with any of their conversations. So let's just start being civil again, and that's what I commit to, continuing to do that.
Thank you.
Real briefly from the law enforcement standpoint, what I plan on doing moving forward is creating the space and opportunity for my officers to have this type of dialogue. And so in law enforcement, it's pretty easy to get into enforcement practices, but it's really, really good and positive for officers to come off of that for a minute and get into these kinds of conversations, because it gets back to building trust. It gets our officers thinking about things in a different way, and we have excellent officers here that would be very happy to do this type of work and enhance it. So that's from the police standpoint.
Thank you, Chief.
I mentioned that tomorrow I'm heading down to the county for one of a series of meetings that we've been having around violent crime. It all started in Edina with an attempted carjacking, but the people that were involved were all juveniles. And so I'm worried about these kids. And while I'll be part of this attempted solution on tamping down the violent crime as quickly as we can throughout the whole metropolitan area, the long-range fear or worry that I have is how are we going to make sure that these kids that are involved in these activities are going to have a decent future and be able to contribute to society. So that's one thing that's in the back of my mind as I work on all this. I'd like to have all the youth that are here stand up, because these are young people I'm not worried about. Yeah, all you high school students that are part of either the HRC or just here today, would you stand up, please, so people can, come on, don't be back. These are young people that are smart and are thoughtful and have been thinking about this issue and are out in schools every day working on trying to make this a better place. And I think that's, to the question of how we're doing, I think it's going to take a while to know exactly how we're doing, but it's these folks that stood up that are going to make the difference, I think, over a long period of time in getting us where we need to be in terms of respecting and appreciating each other. Thank you.
Awesome. So Mayor, I have to ask, I want to push you a little bit. What's your action step? What are you going to do? What is one thing that you're going to do to, I heard around our children. I just want to make sure that we parse out one commitment that we have for you this week.
Yeah, well, my action is to continuing to serve as representative of my community and the western suburban communities in trying to figure out how to both tamp down the violent crime and also reduce, make sure that these kids that are involved in these crimes have a better future. But a lot of it is evolving around race. And I think there's people in the broader community that are thinking, wait a minute, these are all kids of color, or for the most part, kids of color that are involved in this thing. And we got to make sure that we get past that and figure out the solution to the problem. So awesome. I hope that's helpful.
Thank you so much, Lisa.
Both IFRA and I have been working very hard on a strategic plan for safe communities for the entire county, bringing together all of the violence prevention work of the county and others together so that we have a really public health approach towards violence prevention. And of course, a piece of that is the anti-hate, anti-bias initiative that IFRA is really working so hard on. So we'll be pushing forward a lot of the things we've talked about today, continuing on our next step. We have a significant chunk of it to get done this week. So thank you for helping to participate in that.
Last but not least, IFRA, one action step from you.
Well, I agree with Lisa. This week, I am going to continue to have those conversations, to connect those dots, to ensure that our resources are being shared, and I am going to continue to advocate for a better world for my girls and for our children.
Awesome. Thank you so much. If you can all please give our panel a round of applause. Thank you all. Thank you all, friends. And if y'all can feel free if y'all want to come join us in the whatever this section is called. So we're going to keep moving, and we are going to hear another local action story from Sabrine from the Edina Asian American Alliance. Sabrine?
Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Sibi Mirza, and I'm one of the lead student liaisons for the Edina Asian American Alliance. So, for those of you who aren't familiar with EAAA, or the Edina Asian American Alliance, we don't blame you. We're a new organization, we haven't had a whole lot of time to get going, but in the time that we've had, we've made large strides. Now, EAAA didn't start off in the best way. We came together last April after a group of EHS seniors posted a video saying racist Asian or mocking Asian residents of Edina and performing anti-Semitic actions. It wasn't a happy beginning for us. It wasn't something we wanted to do, but we did it because we wanted to come together. But we are so proud of the organization and community we have built. We felt erased and unheard, and we wanted to build a foundation for us to stand together. When we founded, we hit the ground running. We began to reach out to involved parties, including the school board and the superintendent. We joined community meetings, and we made our voices heard. Our intention was to ensure that this didn't happen again, and if it did, we knew what to do, we knew who to go to, and we knew how to move forward. Now, EAAA has 4 pillars to support our mission and vision, and to help our Edina community reach its best potential. Our first pillar is community mobilization. In the 5 months we've existed, we've worked tirelessly to work with the community and move the community forward. Recently, we worked with the school board on editing Policy 506 and worked with other Edina residents to figure out how we could alter the language around reporting forms and reporting systems. This took hours of planning and meetings, but we made it work. We reached out to people in the community, found out what students wanted to do, and we were able to help present a clear path going forward. We also want to continue this dialogue going forward with the District Equity Advisory Committee through the school year. Also in May, we delivered a petition to the school board to introduce a resolution condemning racism. We believe that in order to move forward and create a better Edina, we have to be actively involved in the process of reform. Now, our second pillar is visibility and understanding. We strive to serve our community and help improve cognizance of key issues. We participated in a school board training session on race and equity this past year, walked with other community members in NAMI Walks event of 2022 to raise awareness for mental health, and we were on the parent-student panel for the recent One Town, One Community One Town, One Family event. Ultimately, we hope to make a positive change in Edina, and that can only be done through a consistent presence and consistent efforts to help others. Now, this brings us to our third pillar, serving as a resource. EAAA leadership and members have a wide set of resources and skills that we use to work together. Our goal is to share them and help others. We've worked with the Edina Asian American and Pacific Islander Student Union at the high school, or AAPI. We've worked with the EHS BSU and CAL, or the Coalition of Asian American Leaders, for their event Stories to Action. We want to work with other members in the community and help uplift and help these organizations grow, like the help we needed when we were growing. Now, our final pillar is building coalition and working with others. We've had fruitful community building meetings with Dr. Stanley, Mayor Hovland, Representative Edelson, and the Arts and Culture Commission. We also partner with various community organizations from the JCRC, the Anti-Racism Collective, and the Chinese Community Center. Additionally, we stand with organizations all across the city to ensure that we help everyone find their voice and help them execute their action items. No matter what's ahead, EAAA will continue to fight and advocate for our community, but we can't do it alone. Change can't only be pushed for, it has to be accepted. It's not a project that can be advanced by one group of people. It's the responsibility of every citizen of Edina, every person of the Edina community to join us, to stand up for their neighbors, to reach out and check in with each other. We have to advocate for those around us and help amplify the voices for those who are silenced. Now, I only have 7 months left in the EPS district, and my goal and the goal of EAAA is to help it move forward, help set these motions forward, and help start these action items to ensure that our community continues to grow and improve. You all owe it to your community. You owe it to your neighbors, your friends, your peers. You owe it to everyone around you to fight for change and to fight for progress. Now, as a next step, we invite you to learn more about EAAA. We have a table out there. You can visit our website, join our mailing list, or just start a conversation, because the only way forward is to talk to one another. Thank you so much.
I just want to challenge y'all. The next time y'all hear someone say that our young people are the leaders of tomorrow, or that they're future leaders, be like, nah, they're leading right now. Wow, thank you so much for being here and for sharing. So next we want to talk about our school district. So we're going to invite Erica up, and she is going to be talking about the school district response, as we have heard so much already about young people being impacted by this work. We thought that it was very important for you to be here. So thank you for being here, and you have the floor.
Absolutely. I was invited to talk about school district policy, and given you've been sitting an hour and so minutes, I'll try to make it as interesting as possible. So, as was stated, my name is Erica Allenberg, and I'm chair of the Edina School Board. Dr. Stanley had wanted to be here today, but she is out of town for a superintendent conference. But I just wanted to say that she did wanted to attend. Thank you first to the City of Edina and the Human Rights and Relations Commission for holding this event and having this space that we can talk about these important events. I'm glad that you brought this back, because I do think these are so important. It's going to take work year after year to make progress. for each and every student to discover their possibilities and thrive. This is the mission of the Edina Public School District, and I'd like each of you to focus on a few key words in our vision. First is the phrase each and every. That was a very intentional phrase to call out each individual student. The second is the word thrive, for each and every student to thrive in our district. Our district and school board have policies to ensure that we can live our mission and vision. District policies are one of the key items that are the responsibility of our school board. And our policies can be compared to the rudder of our district. They provide the guidance, the clarity, the direction, and they steer us. So all of us, all stakeholders, students, parents, administrators, community members, teachers, know the expectations of being part of our district. They are also a place that we look to ensure that we are not unknowingly facilitating structural inequities, and our policies are living our mission of serving all. Student conduct and discipline is one of these policies. This policy is reviewed annually by our district and is also guided in part by state and federal law. The point of Edina's disciplinary policy is stated very clearly and aligns with our vision. It's to maintain discipline in order to facilitate a positive learning environment for our students. So why add in language around racism and discrimination in our disciplinary policy? In the past, our district has handled these unfortunate events under other infractions that are part of our policy, such as bullying, verbal abuse, or disorderly conduct. So I go back to the question, why was this ad important? And the answer is for very many reasons. First, I want to state unequivocally and make sure people understand that students and children or adolescents that experience racial bias or animosity are frequently associated with lower self-esteem, higher rates of depression and anxiety. All of these issues are concerning in and of themselves, but they can also lead to problems with academics. One of our key goals as a school district is to facilitate whole child development and academic excellence. And this cannot be done if students are not feeling that they belong in our school district. And as a district, we need to utilize all the tools we can to create a positive learning environment for all. Second, our leadership listened to the voice of student leaders, including EAAA, as you mentioned earlier, and other concerned community members who felt there was a lack of clarity over how these infractions would be punished, which has at times led to confusion and disappointment over perception that our district was not taking racism seriously. As board chair, I know that I truly appreciated the feedback from the students and others, because I do know our district takes these incidents seriously. However, if additional tools were needed to facilitate a better and clearer disciplinary process, it would be beneficial to all. Third, for the students who were victims of these racist and discriminatory acts, it became apparent that it was important that as a district we acknowledge that these acts cannot be treated as standard parts of our disciplinary policy, as though there's just another case of bullying or simply another verbal threat. In doing that and not clearly spelling out and defining what happened and what could happen in our district is racist, xenophobic, and/or discriminatory, among other things, we could unintentionally marginalize these students and families after they had come to us for leadership and guidance. We were unknowingly providing a structure where when we were trying to take these acts seriously, it felt less than, because we were not naming what had happened, which was an act of racism, and we were not punishing the specific act which led to greater hurt for students and families that were already hurting in the first place. This was critical feedback and such an important example of how policies need to be very intentional in their language, and also why it's important to have a diverse set of voices reviewing policies. I do want to state unequivocally that our district does not take any acts of hate, that does take all acts of hate seriously and recognizes the harm they cause others. And there should be no ambiguity that this behavior is acceptable. It's not acceptable in our district. As far as the policy itself, a team of principals, students, administrators, board members with feedback from community members and students worked to create new wording in the policy over a period of a few months, and the new language was unanimously passed by the board this summer and rolled out to all of our schools for the start of school this fall. The added language in the new section listed in the policy reads as follows. The title is Racism, Religious-Based Discrimination, Xenophobia, Sexual Orientation, and Gender-Based Discrimination. Then it states student misconduct based on race, religion, country of origin, sexual orientation, or gender identity that includes but is not limited to inappropriate and harmful comments, slurs, jokes, pictures, objects, threats, and/or intimidation. Like all of our disciplinary guidelines and consequences, there are variable punishments based on grade level and the number of offenses from the student. There is also the opportunity for restorative justice to be applied when appropriate. When this is deemed appropriate is determined by the site level administrator or district administrator. Our disciplinary guidelines apply not only to situations within the walls of our school building, but anywhere that can be defined as a school environment, such as a bus, field trip, athletic events, and can include communications such as social media. As a district leader, I'm hopeful that this policy serves not just to clearly define our stance against racism and hate speech, set expectations and consequences for such actions, but this clarity will also serve as a deterrent to students to stop this behavior before it even starts. Some of our board's renewed commitment to equity work after the murder of George Floyd were to elevate voices of color in our community and work to review district processes through a lens of equity. And hopefully you can see through this policy and the added language that we are working on this actively right now. Additionally, as was mentioned in the speech earlier, that we have created a district equity advisory committee, which is comprised of diverse members of our community, and we have tasked them with reviewing district policies and bringing that feedback to our board policy committee. Finally, I would like everyone to understand that while public schools have a role to play in mitigating racist behavior and punishing it, it's imperative I also stress the importance of the partnership and relationship between schools, parents, students, and our community. The issue of racism is not one that starts at our school doors, and it does not end at our school doors. As community members of the school community, and as many of us are parents and grandparents of children and adolescents in Edina, we all play a role in erasing this behavior from our schools and community. Treating others with respect and dignity begins with each of us as individuals. Sorry, I have one last page that I can't. How we behave as adults affects how our students behave. We need to all hold each other accountable for modeling behavior that we would want our children to model. And it should not be hard to follow the golden rule, which is treating others as you would like to be treated. And we also need to speak up when we hear racist, xenophobic, and discriminatory behavior. And as our school district, it is our commitment to continue the work to fulfill our vision where each and every student can discover their possibilities and thrive. Thank you.
Thank you, Erica. Did y'all catch some of those action steps? I heard things like we need to model the action that we want to see. We need to interrupt when we hear xenophobic, homophobic, racist comments. Action. We're going to now have a conversation with two of our friends, one from Edina and one from St. Paul, Yusef and Eli. They both do restorative practices work. And so we're going to have a conversation. I'm going to join them up here, or they're going to join me up here. And we are going to really talk about what restorative practices mean to us. I think sometimes we hear restorative practice and we think it's just a school-based thing, but I really want to have a conversation about what does this mean for us as community. So Eli, Yusef, will y'all join us? Yeah, y'all should grab y'all chairs.
Do I need this one too?
Yes, you're going to need that one, brother. Here you go. Sure.
I brought this one for you.
Oh, I appreciate you. Always looking out.
You want to be in the middle, right?
No, you can be in the middle. It's fine. So I want to start. If y'all could just introduce yourselves, tell us who y'all are, what y'all do, and we'll go from there.
I'm Eli Michelson. I teach at Southview Middle School just down the road here, and I'm also a leader of the equity team, which is a student leadership group there.
My name is Yusef Davis. I'm the Restorative Practice Coordinator at Como High School. Been in the district 20 years.
Nice. So just like we started our panel, friends, I want to invite you all, as they are both restorative practice practitioners, what questions do you have around restorative practice before we jump into our conversation?
What is restorative justice?
Great.
Good question. I think restorative practice and restorative justice, it's, often people ask, what is it? It's a mindset. It's a way of life. It's a way of living. It's a way of, it's about being honest about historical facts. And it's about being honest about who we are as a country and how we got here, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, go ahead.
I think it's a way that we can, as Chair Ellenberg was saying, treat each other with respect, treat each other with dignity, and really move from there.
Great. Yes.
So after this event that happened that formed the EAAA, there was a video of some kids doing some really disrespectful things. And the schools took it under their wing and addressed it, but several people told me this also harmed our community. And there were people outside the school system who felt very harmed by this. And then again, the incident with the noose at the school district offices, extremely upsetting to people who outside the school system. Can you kind of talk about what can we as community leaders do to get a sense of restoration in an event like that, where we don't have direct control over the kids who did the harm, but we want to acknowledge the harm that people are feeling in the broader community?
I think at Southview, we're really just on our first journey here in restorative practices and really setting the groundwork for, when incidents pop up, when things like this happen, how do we respond? And if we have that groundwork, if students know what restorative practices are, we do circles at Southview. If they have that groundwork, we can go from there and we can deal with incidents beyond just, getting to know one another and sharing ourselves. But yeah, I guess that's what I'll say. I don't know.
I would say the very foundation of restorative work is really displaying to the youth and also adults how we are all so very interconnected, and how what you do affects me and what I do affects you, and that how racism and bigotry, it affects everybody, even the suppressor. So. Whenever we do restorative work at Como, it's really about gaining a deeper perspective of how we all are so very interconnected.
Can you tell us, let's dig deeper, right? We know, RP, which is the acronym for restorative practice. If I use that, just know that's what I'm talking about. Give us the mini PhD. What is restorative practice? How does it work? I know I have studied this and I'm a restorative practice practitioner myself. What are the tenets of it? What makes, if we just go have a conversation, what makes that different than what y'all do as restorative practice facilitators?
Well, I think there's different parts to what a circle looks like. We make sure that we're all on the same playing field. We're all in the circle. We're all here greeting each other. We're all sharing with one another, and we're able to then connect with one another. And so that's where I'm saying, creating a groundwork where we're all feeling heard, we're all feeling seen, and a lot can come out of that.
You know, for me, I would say you know, in order to make RP work within a school setting, your leader has to be on board with making people uncomfortable, you know? And so I know I oftentimes do that in a lot of my PD work with my staff. I oftentimes get the, you know, after PDs, I get the glares, I get the stares. But it's really about creating a space for the kids in which we're serving, right? You know, and getting out of their way. You know what I mean? Sometimes, often as adults, we want to dictate and manipulate, you know, to our liking. But for me, it's just about, you know, creating the space, getting out of the way, and letting the kids, because the kids will tell you what's going on if we listen, you know. And so I've been fortunate to have a principal, Principal Morris, who is very supportive of the work and is okay with making people uncomfortable, right? And so, because that's the starting point, because everybody's at a different point in their journey based on social conditioning, right? And so I think it's important to recognize that and honor that, and also honor people's humanity in the process, you know? That has to be at the forefront.
So I think when a lot of people think of restorative practice, right, restore is in there, which means that something was broken, because we're trying to put this thing back together. But we also know that restorative practice has power to prevent things. Can y'all talk about what restorative practices can do to prevent hate from even happening in the first place?
Yeah, I think we look at it as a way of creating belonging in our school and making sure that students feel like they have a space to be seen and heard, and that they can rise to the occasion. Like you said, you got to listen to the students and let them lead. And you'll find that even at the middle school level, I find that every day kids are ready to have difficult, uncomfortable conversations, and they're ready to lead in this. So I follow them too.
Well, for me at Como, you know, it started with, you know, my very first PD I did with staff. You know, before I did that, I did some real deep historical dive into Como's history, right? And so you just Google Como High School, and there's multiple incidents of racism and bigotry that have, and harm that has taken place within the walls of whiteness within Como. And so, you know, my very first PD, I developed a presentation that displayed the history, and it really irritated a lot of people. But I felt like in order to move forward as a community and to build, we had to go back and put language and identify and notify newcomers, right? Because we had new staff who were oblivious. Oh, Como's a great place. Hold up, man. You don't know where we've been, right? And so doing that deep historical dig was important, because again, if you don't know where you've been, how are we going to know where we're going forward, right?
Reminds me of the African tradition of Sankofa. It's an image of a bird that is walking forward but looking back. This notion that you need to go back and get all that history that was lost to make better decisions. And as I think about the city of Edina and how the mayor talked about earlier about needing to document these things, right? We know it's hard. We know that it's rough. We know that sometimes we want to shy away from that. But as you just mentioned, that documentation is important. Community, what questions do y'all have? Oh, great.
Oh, sorry. First, I want to thank Erica for the presentation. I think, so I'm an Edina parent. My two daughters graduated high school this spring or early summer. And so when the incident happened in the high school, was one of my daughters who spoke up and talked to the media and brought us to a lot of heartaches and places that we never wanted to be. But I'm also an Edina public school employee. When that happened, both my husband and I immediately I wrote a letter to my superintendent, and as parents, we wrote to the principal. To this day, we haven't been acknowledged of our communication to them, and I think to this day, my hurt has not been healed because of that. But we were strongly talking about restorative justice because that very night, when my daughter learned about it, we talked to them about it. And so when they asked what is restorative justice, I said, we want you to imagine what it would be. It's just restoration. Maybe we'll start with that word. But then they said, what will happen when we go back to school tomorrow? We're going to see the same people. These kids are going to be there. I don't know how I'm going to react. And so immediately, both my husband and I said, then go to your guidance counselor, go to the principal, or write to them. You know, be an active participant here, not just wait. But then they said, to schedule to meet with our guidance counselor takes months. I said, so immediately my husband and I looked for the student handbook. Where can we report this? How are we going to do? And I'm an employee and had no idea how to do it. So we did talk about restorative justice. And so my husband and I tried to help my kids both understand what we feel. And we told them, you have to be present in it, as well as the one who created that hurt towards you to be able to talk together. There's no restorative justice if it's just you talking about your pain. And my daughter said, well, we'll find out tomorrow. Then we got a call from the principal. What happened? My daughter acted out. And she said, not a word from the principal, not a word from the counselor, nothing. My husband called me and said, well, I got an email from the principal. We got your email and we thank you. Everything was taken care of. We were shocked. We were not expecting for that reply. So anyway, to this day, my daughter graduated from high school and saying, I hope something is being done. And so I'm so happy to hear, Erica, from your presentation that a lot of the parents' input and the community are taken, being considered. Thank you.
So, thank you so much for your comment and for your story. Do we have another question?
Just what I heard, maybe it actually made me think of in restorative justice. Can it work if only half the folks are there?
No, I don't think it can. I think you have to be willing to be part of the process. And I don't think everyone is always ready for that, but I think we try to make sure that people know what restorative practices look like, what they feel like, what they sound like, so that they're more invited into that space.
Are there methods to invite those folks in?
Well, it gets complicated. When kids don't show up for school or things of that matter. But the buy-in has to be there. And like Eli said, all parties have to be at the table to really get the full impact of what the restorative circle feels like, because again, we're all interconnected. And if we're not all there, then we can't be connected, right?
Thank you for those questions. So I want to ask, as we close out this section, around what can the communities here today, what can they take from restorative practices and use it in their lives? We heard that this personal action is important, that everyone got to show up. You called it a mindset earlier. right? How do we take the theories and the practice, the restorative practice, and apply it to, working people who are in school? How do we make this thing actionable to us? Eli, like, I'm deferring this one.
I think we as a community, as a country, right, we got to get real about how interconnected we all are, that's just the reality of the situation, until it's affecting you in your home. I think, we come from that notion, then it doesn't apply to me or it doesn't affect me, right? But it does. It's going to affect your grandchildren or your great-grandchildren, right? And so, again, it's all about being interconnected and just creating the space. If you create the space, magic can happen.
Yeah, I think creating the space is a good way with your children, with the conversations you have at home. And I think look towards children. I know that this work is being done not only at the middle school level, but even at the elementary school level. And kids are learning how to have these conversations, how to share themselves, how to really lay the groundwork for, when these incidents pop up, when these kind of things happen, how can we talk about them? And so look to the kids.
Awesome. Did you have a question?
I do.
Go ahead.
Just looking to the kids is great, but without any guidance, if we're having a debate in this country about what's real history, true history, how can you talk about this country without bringing up genocide, land theft, and slavery? So if you don't talk about those things, if your kids don't know the history, like Yusef says, how do you know where you're going? How many of the problems that we're experiencing today are products of our past? But if we don't get the story straight, if your kids never learn the story, as painful as it is, you're just giving them a time bomb. They have nothing to reference. They have nothing to go back to. They don't know where we've come from. And if you're not being honest with your students and your family members about the history, how do you expect your kids to act in the world?
I gotta carve out a space real quick, since we got Mayor Jim here. I just want to share a personal experience with the city of Edina, okay? And this is, I'm just keeping it 100. About 10 years ago, I was a basketball coach, and I was working for the Wilder Foundation. Anybody familiar with the Wilder Foundation?
Yeah, I used to work there.
Okay, beautiful. So I was using the basketball as a tool for an incentive for some of the students that I was working with. I was a coach, and we used to take tournaments locally. And we came to Edina. We won. We won the tournament, and we got back in I was driving a minivan at that time, and piled in the kids, and they said, "Hey, Coach Davis, what is Cake Eater Classic?" Right? And I said, good question. So I had to unpack this terminology that I think still to this day that the city of Edina continues to use. So I ask of you, Mayor, and all of you people who are residents of Edina, please, at what point in time do we get rid of Cake Eater Classic? It's not appropriate. Cake Eater Classic, yeah. Anybody familiar? No?
Oh, sure.
Come on, y'all. Yeah, like at what point in time do we like say, hey, you know what, this ain't okay? It's not. I shouldn't have to explain that to a 9-year-old who's coming from an impoverished area on the east side of St. Paul, what Cake Eater Classic means. Because language is powerful, right?
That's true.
All right, I'm just an ask. At some point in time, hopefully in my child's generation, we won't have that. Maybe even take away the trophies. I don't know.
thank you for your time today. I appreciate it. Thank you also for your comments as well, community. Restorative practice is powerful, and as we listen to the principles of it, right? I just heard so much around making space. I mean, that alone, I think, as we live busy lives, today y'all have made space. But how do we continue to make space for these conversations? I heard things like going back and looking at our history, even though it's hard. That's part of what restorative practices do. You got to sit there and you got to listen to what you did. Just a few things that I think we can take into our lives to support us in stopping the hate. Thank you, Eli and Yusuf. Appreciate y'all. So our last story from our community locally is going to come from Colleen at the League. Say it again? Feige. Feige. Did I say it right, Feige? Feige. I said it right, good. As she talks about what the women of the League of Women Voters are doing in this community. Please welcome her.
And let me say that it's not just the women of the League of Women. Oh, that one? Switch, huh? Yeah. Okay. It's not just the women of the League of Women Voters. We have lots of different people involved in the League, male, female, young, old. Everybody is welcome to join. And you're probably thinking, what is the League of Women Voters doing here? I mean, you know, we thought you only did voter registration and getting out the vote and so forth. But no, we work to grow, empower, and protect the vote to make democracy work for all, not just white or Hispanic or gay, or for everyone, and that's really important. And also, we actually have a public commitment to advocate and participate in local action. That would be Edina action, to eradicate discrimination and systemic racism. And what have we done to that end? We have produced events that focused on voting rights for indigenous people, also the felon disenfranchisement. There are a lot of things that are happening that affect people within our community as well. We also led a racial justice book discussion in collaboration with the Edina Community Foundation and the Edina Public Schools, and we read Stamped, Racism, Anti-Racism, and You. We've written articles to the Sun Current about the day Julian Bond came to Edina. Who knew? I didn't, I can tell you that. And just to kind of keep things in front of people, we are in the process of completing a study of the nonprofits in Edina, some of them, like 50 of them, about how they're dealing with diversity, equity, and inclusion so that we can take that information and share what are best practices, people that are finding successful, or perhaps even things that weren't successful, because a lot of times you learn as much from that as from other things. And also, we're showing up. We are showing up at the event at Lewis Park after that's actually where I met a lot of the EAAA folks. They were not that group yet, but it was to talk about what went on. And there were students, allies of the students that were there. There was a walkout from the high school at that day. So we were there to support them, to be an ally to them. We gathered at 50th and Wooddale when people were going past and honking horns, you know, stop the hate and Black Lives Matter and so on. We have registered voters at Juneteenth, the first Juneteenth, I think it was, and that was great. We have out there, we have our bookmarks where we have we have a little map of Minnesota, and it says, "Voting is power," in English, Spanish, and Somali. And a gentleman came up and said, "That's in my language." And that kind of made it really nice that he recognized it was in his language and that we cared about that. And we also registered voters at the Anti-Racism Collective and People of Faith initiative, which was last week. So we are out there trying to make sure that everyone knows that everyone matters. And whatever we can do to stop discrimination and racism and so forth, we need to do that. But let me say that it's been wonderful to hear from the governments and the various groups, but stopping the hate is really incumbent on all of us, each individual. Talk to your neighbor that says, oh, I don't have white privilege. Talk to your neighbor who is Hispanic or Jewish or black. Talk to them about, how are you feeling? As Terry had said, how are you feeling? Because that's how we learn how things are going and how we improve our community. And we're all supportive of doing that. So thank you very much for having us today.
Thank you. Thank you. So I have the final word of the day. As we have talked about government action, we done talked about school district action, we done talked about local action, and now it's time to talk about personal action. Colleen couldn't have set this up any better. I promise we just met each other like 25 minutes ago. Because I think sometimes, friends, when we come to events like this or when we talk about big issues, we think about them as this one big thing that we need to do. But that's not how I think about it. And I want to offer you today, that's not how you should think about it. How many of you brushed your teeth this morning? No, even if you didn't, you should still be raising your hand right now. At some point in your life. And, I like to think of this work around brushing your teeth. See, if you want healthy teeth, you brush your teeth every day for just 3 minutes a day. It's a small action compared to the rest of your day. Have any of you went to the dentist before? Yes. And you were kind of feeling a little guilty, and so you grab your toothbrush. Some of y'all know where I'm going. And then you grab some peroxide, and you put the peroxide on the toothbrush with your toothpaste so it can get really scrubbly and bubbly. And then you just went to work, and you was brushing your teeth. And then you floss. You ain't flossed all year, but you flossed that day. And then you show up to the dentist, and they're like, oh, you haven't brushed your teeth. Doctor, what do you mean? I literally just spent 30 minutes before I got here brushing my teeth. See, friends, that's how this work is sometimes. Is that we want this intense thing, but really, I just need you to brush your teeth for 3 minutes a day. It's the small things that make a big difference. And I think the things that we have heard here today, they haven't been gigantic leaps. They haven't been big things. They've been small things. And I think when we talk about personal action and how we're going to stop the hate, that's where we need to start. And so I want to invite you all to take some time to reflect on what are you going to do? What are you going to do personally to help stop the hate? What are you going to do? I'm going to give you a few moments to reflect. And we're going to have a little share out of those commitments and those action steps. I don't need you to have 25 things. I think some people are like, I need to do this, I need to do this, I need to do this, I need to do this. The reality is, friends, when you do that, you don't do any of it. So I just want you to come up with one thing. Just one step forward today. What are you going to do? I'll give you a few moments, and then we're going to do a little share out of some of the personal action that we can take. So I want to offer space for you all to share. We have 2 mics here, and you can just raise your hand, and your ask is, what are you going to do to help stop the hate? The floor is open.
Well, on Saturday, I'm leaving on a week-long trip to Mississippi and Alabama, a civil rights tour to see, to learn more about the past and be able to share that information and knowledge with the people here that I know and run into. So that's one thing I'm doing.
Thank you.
I think often we get so used to talking to the choir, preaching to the choir, and I'm going to talk with someone who I know that is not in the choir and try to get them understanding more. And one thing I liked that I learned today was restorative practice rather than restorative justice, because I know restorative justice really makes her angry. And I think practice is better, and I'm going to learn more about that.
Great.
I think one of the most important things I can do is talk about race and history with my family and children, and we talk about race and the impact of race on our family and other families quite often, to the point that my kids sometimes are like, can we stop talking about this? But I think that starting at home, making sure that you're raising children that understand the dynamics of race in our country and the history of our country, to me is one of the most important things that, well, I can do. So.
I would like to recommend to you a book by Preet Bharara. It's called Justice Is, and it is aimed at children. And then share it in children, like I shared it with my 7-year-old granddaughter and 5-year-old grandson, and talk about the things that are in there. And the other grandma didn't agree with some of the things, and it was important for her to understand that people have different opinions. Just because Harvey Milk was gay, he's in this book, he was gay and he was murdered, and her other grandma doesn't believe that, but it's okay. Her other grandma's a fine person, just there's different positions. It's a very good book by Preet Bharara, Justice Is.
Awesome. Thank you. One more after you, Ephraim.
Well, you guys hear me?
No, yes.
Okay. So what I plan to do and what I continue and what I really want to continue is that in some communities, especially my community, for me, we have normalized microaggressions. We have normalized incidents. So what I want to continue is to make sure that I, let my kids know that certain incidents are not acceptable. I want to make sure that their friends know, that my family members know. So just looking internally in our own communities and making sure that, when I have conversations, and this was for many, many years, it's like, oh, that happens, that's okay. We normalized it. It's so normal for us to look at certain incidents and just kind of disregard it as an incident. So I think acknowledging that there's an incident, acknowledging that it shouldn't happen. I think that's what I plan to continue. Thank you.
One more, friends. Anyone in the crowd want to share? What are you going to do?
I'm probably not the only one who does this, but I think I'd like to resolve to push back a little more when I hear something or see something that is a bias, not an offense, but a bias, evidence of bias. It's easy to roll your eyes and think to yourself, what a jerk, and walk away, rather than to engage the person about why they're having that sort of an attitude toward people.
Awesome. So friends, we have heard just a few, and I know everyone in this space have maybe a similar one or some that they're going to commit to do. I want to tell you that we are going to be a better community because of this event. I want to end with just a reflection of all the things we have heard today. My good friend Maggie has been over here silent but working really hard to graphically record this space and some things that she heard today. And so we want to share that with you as we leave this space. What I asked her to do very intentionally was to really focus on action steps instead of just, oh, I heard this or I heard that. And so here is the graphic that she has so beautifully created. As you see, it has all of our different actions from local to governmental. But the core of the work is that personal piece. So friends, I want to thank you all for taking your time, taking your Sunday. It has been an honor and a privilege to be your facilitator. Can we just give one final round of applause to all of our presenters? And I want to end with a quote, friends. As I began it with one, I would love to end with a quote. And I am thinking of a quote by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who said that if you can't fly, try running. And if you can't run, walk. And if you can't walk, you might have to crawl your way through this thing. But whatever you do, Edina, let's keep moving forward. Hey, thank y'all, friends. I appreciate y'all.